Hi everybody, welcome. Despite my Blanchy roots, I have been away for a very long time. I was away for over 25 years, came back to a very different Ireland. And part of that time was spent with the International Baccalaureate as a curriculum designer. Part of that time was spent as a textbook writer. And more recently then came back to Ireland to establish an IB school here in Leopardstown, which some of you may be familiar with, North Anglia. I'd like to contextualise what we're going to talk about today, in the sense that Iblana is now providing support and guidance for international schools. And some of you may know international schools tend to be quite innovative, sometimes very privileged, often highly competitive. So you can imagine the kind of adoption they've done with AI. They have been incredibly enthusiastic, somewhat skeptical, and I find myself in the middle of that guidance with schools. So I often will listen to the schools carefully, establish what their norms are, and then we started by offering strategic AI advice. And before long, that became clear that teachers and students wanted greater levels of support and greater clarity around it. And the International Baccalaureate was a bit unique in that they came out in 2023 very quickly and said, AI is just a tool, it's fine to use it. And all of the schools breathed a sigh of relief and they went, that's absolutely great. And then the next reaction was, what on earth does that mean? And the IB released no further guidance for a long time. So we've been in these schools seeing both the good and the bad, the ugly and the innovative. And we have trended very, very much towards moderate, centrist, responsible advice. And over time, the more I learned about it, the sustainability became really, really important. So during this talk, this keynote, this advice, quite often, internationally, they'll say, thank you so much, Irish woman, for this Catholic guilt that we did not need, about the consumption and the emissions. But it's something that we need to think about carefully because, as we know, UNESCO has probably released one of the most balanced definitions of what we need in education. So their perspective from 2024 says teachers must be the guardians of safe and ethical practice. So far, so good. So far, so moderate. And then in the very next line, the call to action, the call to innovation. Teachers must be those guardians of AI-rich educational environments. So it's not okay to withdraw, it's not okay to absent. It's really important that we provide AI richness for students. And I like that they haven't said AI saturation or AI overload, which is what many schools are experiencing. Quite realistically, there is an AI fatigue in many situations, there's an AI overload, and the schools that are doing it well have covered at least 3, sometimes all 5 of these principles. And these are the calls for schools, the ones that can't get their heads above water at the moment. They cannot even think about some of these things. But these core ethical principles are the lack of transparency around AI use, students with teachers, obviously friction, teachers with leaders. Teacher overuse has been a massive theme of the last 6 months. And I didn't expect that. I didn't expect so soon for students to be getting annoyed with teacher use, or to be feeling that these reports that have AI text within them feel unpersonal, or that they don't like AI feedback on potentially sometimes their AI generated work. So the irony, but it is a truth that we're seeing across schools, from Saudi Arabia to Japan to the UK. Teachers have greater friction with students now because of this, and also with leaders, because the leaders then cannot stand over an accusation if we don't have totally reliable AI detection. So more about that later. We also need to ensure that in schools, the AI use is fair, that it's obviously unbiased, that it's safe, and that we're disclosing when we use it in classes, because students can pick up straight away. You all can. When we get an email from someone that starts with, I hope this email finds you well, or when they forget to take off the, let me know if you'd like to write this again. When this happens, it happens to students, it's happening to teachers, it's happening absolutely everywhere. So these patterns and trends that we see in the international school sector is, as I say, this increased friction. A concern, but a lack of clarity around personalized feedback. The irony that we really get excited, and it's a real excitement, and it's a real opportunity for accessibility. Language teachers are often the most excited. The second most excited are often special educational or accessibility champions within a school, because this is a massive unlock. This is an incredible chance, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make education more personalised, more directed, more available. But we're finding that in some schools, that is leading to an increase in the algorithmic bubble that students find themselves in. Because AI, if AI knows that you like things with superheroes, that's what it's going to suggest forever. And then you're never exposed to other ideas, other tastes, other experiences. We're seeing a high degree of concern around emotional support. Students who are engaging with AI in a highly dangerous, highly dependent way. 2 a.m. trauma dumps, they call them. God unlocks or God prompts, that's another thing. They're sharing these widely on TikTok in the interest of their better mental health. But of course, we as adults know that the sycophancy built into AI means that they're very rarely disagreed with, and their opinion is always right, and they're always empowering with their own boundaries, and they don't get challenged in that way. And of course, we have academic integrity, constantly a theme, and now it's married with cognitive offloading. So of course, I could talk about all of these all day, but this is not the main part. The main part that we want to think about is what is actually happening here in Ireland that I share with those schools to try and help them think differently. And I think this is the statistic that really shocked me, and I'm not sure how many Irish people think about it on the daily when we're using our AI for quick prompt generation, but it still shocks me that 22% of our grid is currently dedicated to the data centres. And in Dublin, where I am, down the road from Intel, over half of our energy is consumed by data centres. When you tell that to somebody outside of Ireland, they fall off their chair. They cannot believe that half of our energy consumption is entirely AI and data and cloud related. It boggles their minds, and I think it probably should ours too. We know that it's an economic imperative, that it's essential to our development financially as a country, and that demand is increasing. That demand is shooting up. It's incredible that we're not thinking about the scaling impact of AI and energy. So it has become, I tell people that it's become kind of an admitted truth in Ireland that we're not going to meet our CO2 climate goals. And that the conversation has very quickly shifted from what can we do to meet these goals to where will we find the money to pay these goals fines off. And I think that is something that people don't really realise is interconnected and not entirely caused by, but definitely influenced by, our increasing dependence on AI. As you've probably seen, energy infrastructures are under massive stress globally. And of course, what is big tech's response? Leave it to us, we'll handle it. Just let us build a separate grid. Let us stand outside of the national contribution and we'll do it. Now, this conversation's gone very quiet. I don't have an end to the story. I'm not sure if it was approved or denied. I assume it wasn't approved. But the fact that that is the solution, leave it with us. We can handle this. And I think big tech hasn't always given us necessarily a reason to trust that they will do it correctly and well and for the benefit of the community. So when I speak to schools, students and teachers, some are aware. And they honestly think, okay, AI is free. It's a very simple, magical process. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer. And they don't think about the processing behind that. They don't think about the compute that's required, the energy that went into training the model, the energy that goes into the refinements and updates of each model, the energy that then is created, the demand created by them. Every image, every video, every prompt, every automated action. And when you start to think about that, and you start to try and do some calculations, as imperfect as they can be, because there's not much data that you can get that's readily and available and trustworthy, but when you start to think about them, the energy demands pile up. So we talk to schools, we talk to students, and we say, what are your concerns about the environment? It's bad for the environment. As Sean said, it's bad for the environment. How? I don't know. It just is. CO2, water. They'll give you some random ideas like that. And all of them true, and all of them disconnected. So it's very important that we have real data, that we have statistics that we can share so that we can make these ideas tangible, that we give them agency and autonomy. Because everything in AI for students is a balance between the power that it gives them and the agency that they need to retain. And that's a very hard thing to do. When AI is designed with, would you like me to start that for you? Would you like me to generate that for you? Should I do the slides? Would you like me to do a script to go with the slides? For a student, it's hard enough for us to pull back from that seductive offer. But for a student, it's very hard, particularly in a high-stakes, competitive environment, or what's a nice word for lazy? If you're effort-sensitive, for example. For our effort-sensitive students, it's a godsend. It's an absolute gift. So why wouldn't they allow AI to take away the friction? Why wouldn't they not think about the environmental cost for a moment, or their cognitive offloading, or their emotional dependency? All very important to consider. And then you give them some statistics, some of which really land and some of which really don't. For example, if I tell them that ChatGPT cost $100 million to train, they don't really care. The money in AI has become so ludicrous that it's lost all meaning. If I tell them that it's taken 50 gigawatts hours of energy to train, they'll think, well, that's GPT-4, that's ancient. And I'll say, exactly. Think of all the models since then. Think of all the energy required since then. Think of the back-end work that's happening to provide you with seemingly instant answers. Somebody has to pay for it. And that's a concept that's kind of unique to them, that's kind of new to them. The idea that this free service that does this incredible work, that somebody has to pay for it. And all of our years doing digital literacy with them, they think, oh, well, I'm paying for it with my data, because they've learned that as a phrase. But genuinely, those computations have to be paid for. The energy consumption comes from somewhere. So if we think about equivalences, that the idea that ChatGPT-4 and the energy that it required to train it is somewhere between 165 and 326 terawatt hours per year. And that is enough to power 22% of US homes, which is a considerable amount. If we think about into the future, or if we think about other equivalences, that is enough energy that would generate the same emissions as driving over 300 billion miles. Now, these are statistics from MIT. It's quite an interesting report. And when we take a step back and look at what we're doing, and when we look at the usage, and we think about text, video, audio, songs, images, everything that's happening on the daily, we're at a position now where the weekly active users of ChatGPT has exceeded 800 million. And those are active weekly users. We've never seen a technology adopted this quickly and this widely. So it's important for us to now have economies of scale or sensible scales to think about, because text generation is relatively low energy. Images, much higher energy consumption. Videos, even worse. And it was such a fun video this morning, and as soon as I saw it, my heart sank, and I was like, oh. For 10 seconds, you've used 900 times more energy than a single prompt. And if it's worth it, fantastic. Because we need a culture of good use cases. We need things that AI is really good at, and we're willing to spend that time. We're willing to spend that energy. Plastic keeps people alive. My daughter's diabetic. She generates an awful lot of plastic waste, thanks to the incredible technology that exists. And plastic is polluting our world. We know that. So we need a similar framing for AI. There are bits where it's wonderful, and there are bits where it's terrible. And students don't see it that way. They see it in a very binary, and many teachers see it very binary as well, and many leaders. So when we think about it, the next natural step is 3D world maps and models. These are really concerning me, because the energy that they will generate, has anybody seen Genie 3 from Google? Has anybody seen VO3? It's the next natural step. You can submerge yourself into a universe, much like being in a gaming platform, but you can actively change it around you. It's basically Star Trek holodeck. Imagine how much energy that's going to take. So some of the numbers that we give students, we used to say that asking ChatGPT a question and asking Google the exact same question, there was a 10x difference, 10 times more energy. Now, of course, Google has messed that up because they also use AI now in overviews, so that statistic is no longer pertinent. Does anybody know how to bypass Google AI? Yeah, rude words, or ask it about Trump and dementia somehow in your question. Then it bypasses it, but otherwise, it's imposed upon you. And when you think about how insane we all went when U2 downloaded and uploaded an album without our permission, and how easily we've accepted that Meta AI can just appear on our WhatsApp one day and there's no way to get rid of it, there is a very different approach there. And there's a very different conversation to have with students. Because if we tell a student a 30-second deepfake video requires the exact same amount of energy, give or take, based on imperfect calculations, but for the same time, 30 seconds of deepfake video of relatively high quality, you could watch all of the episodes of Friends 5,000 times. That equivalence hits kids because they know streaming, they feel streaming, but also that is a phenomenal amount of energy. And we're walking in a very energy blind way into reckless adoption. and reckless experimentation. So this, I don't think we'll have time for this, but I'll show you. I'll see if the sound will work.
What you're seeing are not games or videos. They're worlds. Each one of these is an interactive environment generated by Genie 3, a new frontier for world models. With Genie 3, you can use natural language to generate a variety of worlds and explore them interactively, all with a single text prompt. Let's see what it's like to spend some time in a world. Genie 3 has real-time interactivity, meaning that the environment reacts to your movements and actions. You're not walking through a pre-built simulation. Everything you see here is being generated live as you explore it. And Genie 3 has world memory. That's why environments like this one stay consistent. World memory even carries over into your actions. For example, when I'm painting on this wall, my actions persist. I can look away and generate other parts of the world. But when I look back, the actions I took are still there. And Genie 3 enables promptable events, so you can add new events into your world on the fly. Something like another person, or transportation, or even something totally unexpected. You can use Genie to explore real-world physics and movement, and all kinds of unique environments. You can generate worlds with distinct geographies, historical settings, fictional environments, and even other characters. We're excited to see how Genie 3 can be used for next-generation gaming and entertainment. And that's just the beginning. Worlds can help with embodied research, training robotic agents before working in the real world, or simulating dangerous scenarios for disaster preparedness and emergency training. World models can open new pathways for learning, agriculture, manufacturing, and more. We're excited to see how Genie 3's world simulation can benefit research around the world.
Advertising. It's going to be used for advertising. It's essentially going to be a submersive, immersive experience. And the science teacher in me is really excited by it. And the history teachers that I hear are really excited about it. And the energy consumption will be obscene. I think it's really important that we think about these things before we stumble into the demand and the reciprocal nature of entertainment. They said entertainment, and then they said a couple of other good things like rescue missions and embodied learning. This is all really important and really expensive. Expensive for the planet and expensive for the developers. So if we think about some statistics in terms of global consumption, when I started doing this talk with schools and with organizations, we were on track to exceed energy consumption this year, approximately equal to the annual consumption of the Netherlands, dedicated to AI only. We're now way past that. Because of Sora and VO and all of these really engaging platforms, we're way past Japan at the moment. And I'm not quite sure where we'll finish this year. But we see money pouring in. We see 80 billion investment in Stargate. And we hear of data centers and processing units of already 1 gigawatt, so the footprint of Manhattan, for example. We're hearing about this in the US a lot. And then, of course, this week, we hear that Meta is going to go up to 5 gigawatts, which is an obscene amount of energy when we think about it. 5 gigawatts to feed this incessant demand. 5 gigawatts is like 4 Back to the Futures. It's an insane amount of energy. If we are doing that to feed the demand, then the demand has to also be perpetuated. So we have to think about that very carefully. If all of these scales, all of this hyper-scaling that's happening has to be matched by energy consumption, somebody has to pay for it. Somebody has to provide it. And if we look at Elon Musk's AI, Grok AI, they had an urgent need. They were way behind in terms of LLMs. And they were possibly 2 to 3 years behind in development. So what did they do? They threw money at the problem. They hired every single diesel generator in the US they could get. I think they had 75% of capacity. Every coolant they could get. Set up potentially not quite legal foundations in the desert and caught up within about 3 months. So if energy is the limiting factor, it's not really. If money is the limiting factor, potentially that's where we might see an AI bubble potentially burst. But at the moment, we know that the investment and the equivalents that are included are extraordinary. And where's that energy going to come from? Well, we see in the UAE that they're investing 1.3, I'm home now so I can say 1.3 trillion dollars. Trillion dollars to come from solar, yes, but also from nuclear. We've normalized nuclear in a way that I don't think I expected in the 80s would ever happen again. We're talking about 3 Mile Island being reopened. We're talking about micro-nuclear grids. And that energy has got to come from somewhere. And the counterbalance to that energy demand comes from education. Because we have now a role in this space, and our voice has been small enough. When we think of innovation and we think of enterprise, education has been reacting to AI. All of this rethinking, all of this reskilling has been to catch up and to redefine our role. And we do need to take more of a role. Because AI, the schools that we work with, they're in intense panic mode. The first year, hyper panic. The second year, excited about tools. And this year, as unexpected consequences are starting to bubble up, like deepfakes. We always expected deepfakes as a problem, peer on peer. But peer on teacher, teacher on leader, organized crime on school, that's happening a lot. In the international schools, they are having a massive problem at the moment with organized crime gangs taking pictures off the school website and blackmailing them with deepfake. And that is incredibly destructive to teachers, to psychological safety, to the students themselves. It's a massive problem. So if we have all of these introduced now to international schools, I have to go and talk to them about the legal ramifications of some of their AI choices. Of course, they have reputational challenges. Teacher overuse, student overuse, access to universities being denied because of overuse, real significant problems. Societal problems are not always schools' problem, but we do have the best possible intervention method. We do have the earliest, and optimism is a real duty in education. We have a duty to stay optimistic despite all of this incredible overwhelm for schools. Environmental, which we'll talk about more in a moment, financial costs, and pedagogic. The most important thing is the risk that AI presents to pedagogy in terms of cognitive offloading. We'll talk about that as well. And for schools in this jurisdiction, and increasingly China and the Middle East, is legislation. One of the things that I find really surprising about the EU AI Act is that they classified education as high risk. I was like, sure, I mean, we're just playing. Like, we can experiment a little bit in school. And their definition is really super tight. It's that if you allow AI to make a decision on a student's future, there's nothing more high risk than that. That's exactly where the human needs to be in that loop. Because if you decide that AI can do marking, and their grade stops them from getting into a certain class, and then that class stops them from getting into university, and therefore impacts their entire life, that is the highest risk that we know. So it's absolutely important that the EU AI Act is implemented properly in European schools. And that means really that every staff member has to be trained, and every use of AI in the building has to be known. And that's a huge, huge thing for schools to have to do. And on top of that then, we need a sustainable AI. There's nothing worse than somebody coming in and telling you, oh, this all has to be redone. We have to rethink it. This isn't working for the future. And then they leave. I used to have a colleague, Lisa, who would call that the minister of pointing out the obvious. We need actual answers. We need tools and frameworks, and I'm delighted to hear a discussion of that in this day, and also the last few days have been really influential, that assessment isn't driving the conversation anymore. Curriculum, pedagogy, well-being, safeguarding, those voices are being heard more. And sustainability is the one that's the latest and the last to the party. So we need to think much more about what sustainable use looks like in school. Because there's a playbook out there. Big tech, or tech bros, or hype bros, whatever you want to call them, there's a very real phenomenon. About 6 months ago, it started, where I recognized, as a science teacher, I recognized this move before, adopting and adapting from the climate change language. We don't call it global warming anymore, we call it climate change. The same thing was happening in the tech space. I would see equivalences, and this is the maths teacher side of me now getting angry, I would see equivalences that were selected very carefully to dampen down any criticism. So here's one of the classics from Sam Altman a couple of months ago. If you express a concern about the water consumption or the water use of AI, you're often quoted this back. Somebody will say, well, what about the meat sector? What about beef? Because Sam Altman chose to amplify this message at one point, where he says, I particularly love when the anti-AI crowd makes up shit about our water usage while eating a hamburger. And the graph shows a very carefully selected statistic that the amount of energy, it specifically doesn't mention energy, it specifically mentions water, 100 ChatGPT queries to one hamburger. And of course, it conveniently ignores the fact that the hamburger is already a problem. We already know this, and AI is compounding it. It's an additive, not an alternative. And it also conveniently ignores the fact that there are plenty of people doing 600 queries a day. I go into schools and I can see students who are doing 2, 3, 5, 600 queries during the school day when they have their device. I can only imagine how much they're doing in the evening. So these numbers are not a valid equivalence. And this denial kind of persisted all over the summer. It was clear that nobody wanted to say the words energy or power in any of these discussions. The words that you would tend to hear as a euphemism, which I recognize from the climate change debate, would be compute. We need more compute. We need a lot of compute. We need computational power. Inference, that's another great euphemism. It happens to be true, but it underlies the fact that all of these calculations require energy. So if you hear people saying we need more inference, that means we need more infrastructure and we need more power. Training runs, again, that sounds very interesting. Training runs, quite innocent, quite inoffensive, but it means massive amounts of energy. Workloads, talking about what GPUs can handle, talking about what data centers' capacities might be. Then there's latency optimization, that's another great one, talking about that. Really, really significantly undercuts what's being truly spoken about, which is energy. Edge computing, that's always another great one. If we can pass the energy onto the consumer, if you can put it on your device and have a local GPU or a local AI running, then energy is not our problem anymore. And cloud compute. These kind of phrases were being thrown around all summer as a defense against, essentially, it's not a big problem, it's not us. I mean, we're only a tiny part of the energy, we're only a tiny part of the CO2 emissions. But then the tone changed around about the time of when the US executive order started to come out and started to trickle down. And the executive order around AI basically said, this is our number one concern. We don't care if it needs a lot of energy. We don't care if it needs a lot of land. We don't care if it cuts off energy or water access for our citizens. We have to win this race. We have to win this arms race. And it effectively says that. It says, it frames the AI as a national security imperative. If we don't win this race, we're doomed. Effectively is the conversation that we hear in American schools. We work with a lot of American schools and they're torn, they're really stuck in the middle. They have pressure to instantly implement AI literacy and pressure not to talk about the ethics. And that's a horrible place to be in because you need both of those two things to get the innovation as well as the care and consideration. They also have a 10-year moratorium currently. It's still going through the houses, trying to figure out how are they going to stop any regulation on AI, with the exception of therapy. This week in Illinois, they did ban AI therapy within the state because they realized the dangers and the concerns. But they are treating it as an AI arms race, as we knew they would. And it is definitely showing that there's zero tolerance for any delay. Schools are expected to implement AI curriculum tomorrow. And the Departments of Defense, the Departments of Agriculture, the Departments of the Marine, they've been told to release any land necessary to make this happen. So whether you see that as a really good thing in terms of AI innovation, or a really scary thing in terms of no guardrails and no guidance, schools are stuck in the middle there. So my heart really goes out to those in terms of how are they going to balance and straddle between energy demands and curriculum demands and realistic funding. They'll lose their fundings. Many of them are closing already, charter schools and so on. And then how does it affect assessment? So we have AI happening in the classroom, whether we see it or not. We see AI working in terms of student work in the evening. When I go into schools, I hear phrases like homework apocalypse, or there's no point, or I hear like, this is going to revolutionize everything. It saved me 20% of my working. So I hear extreme opinions. But people tend to be unified around assessment. And the concern about protecting the integrity of student learning and protecting the integrity of our assessments and our qualifications go hand in hand. And still, there are incredible opportunities. For example, when I worked at the IB, one of our main headaches for writing exams was the cost of humans. The cost of human labor is significant, and the cost of expert human labor, really significant. We had a problem with exposure of questions. As soon as the exams in Hong Kong would be finished in China, kids are leaking the questions online, so the kids waking up in Turkey can do it. And you would see the grades significantly change globally as the day went on. So we have exposure. So imagine if you could have 24-hour time zones of different papers per child. That would be incredible. We always had a nightmare with budgets and copyright. Getting the right picture for the right purpose and not having to worry about the licensing would be amazing. So all of these things are a financial and moral imperative to try, at least with AI. But let's take an example in terms of energy. If I had one of my assessment authors, has anybody done some assessment authoring? There can be blood on the walls over a single word. Like, it's intense. It's really intense because people want to do the best for students. So if I hired an assessment writer to write a question, and imagine they did 10 queries. What do you think of this question? Let's refine it. Let's criticize it. And then if they did a couple of images to go with the question, maybe a stimulus or a picture or something to go with it, and a quick 5-second video, just to explain to the other examiners what they were thinking. Now, this wouldn't be unusual. Quite often, people will share questions like this, and they'll ideate with AI, and they'll fact check with AI, and then they'll test it again, and they'll do some calculations, and they'll go back. Per question, that would mean, approximately, for those few queries, a couple of pictures, and a short video, that would be approximately 3 kilowatt-hour energy, which is quite abstract. Unless you're a physicist or you really, really like energy, that wouldn't mean anything to you. Until you start doing some equivalences, that could be 10 miles of driving. Or, this one really hurts as the electricity bill payer in the house, 3.5 hours of microwaving. That is a lot of energy. When you think about the microwave on for 3.5 hours. And that can be done in 10, 15 minutes. And the examiner can go on to write many, many more questions and much more energy demand. So as we think about a move to on-screen for curriculum or for assessment, we need to rethink that paper's bad, on-screen is good. Because in some cases it really is, and in other cases it really isn't. So for the IB, for example, one of the case studies that we've done is if they wanted to automate all examining. And that means just opening the question, seeing if there's anything in there, and then closing it again. Just opening and closing. For the number of kids that they have, and it's about 192,000 students, sitting, similar to the Leaving Cert, approximately 6 subjects each. And in each of those, 2 papers. And in each of those papers, probably about 10 questions. Now, it's not really 10, it's way more, but I tried to lowball it a little bit. Just to have an AI automate that process, you would have 26 million unique queries. That's 26 unique prompts that you would have to open, close, check, and then notify the system. So I decided to do some calculations manually, and then I checked them with ChatGPT, because the numbers are imperfect and we have to make some assumptions. Now, I know looking at somebody else's ChatGPT is about as interesting as hearing about somebody else's dreams or going to somebody else's nativity play, but it is important that we think about these equivalences and where they sit. So for 26 million queries, not to do any work at all, I asked for some energy approximations and some CO2 calculations. One of them was just to open the questions and close them again and not do anything, any marking or any reading or any prompting. That would be equivalent to the consumption for a house of about 6 months. Now, the IB would think, okay, well, that's a fair cost. I'm okay with that. And then you could go further down and say, well, in terms of meals cooked, that's about 23,000 meals. Okay, maybe that hits differently, maybe that feels different, maybe not. In terms of driving, it's about 1.37 times the annual consumption of an average electric vehicle driver. So again, these feel like scalable, manageable numbers. But then if you think year on year, and then if you think more realistically in terms of how many actual actions it would require. Now, this is ignoring bots. Bots really do help with energy, by the way. If you can define a bot really well, it can reduce your energy consumption to 1/30th of what you did before, because you don't have to retrain it and recontext it every single time. So bots are actually really, really good for this. But for CO2, the story is very different. The CO2 emissions, when I compared it to paper, Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but it's still significant. And we know that in 2023, the CO2 emissions of the airline industry was already past that of data centers and AI. So I can only imagine what it's like now. So if we think, at what point is one better than the other? At what point is one worse than the other? We need to think about break even. Because a lot of our decisions that we're making around AI are based on fuzzy logic right now. They're based on what we think is right, what we feel is probably right, what's exciting and what's scary, and we need more calculations. So one of the things that I calculated was, at 46 billion queries, you'd be better off on paper. You're actually doing less damage to the environment at 46 billion queries. So that's about the examinations for the IB for 4.5 years. After that 5th year, you're actually using way more consumption. Now that ignores the fact of Jevons paradox, that we know that the efficiencies are getting better all the time. The efficiencies are incredibly full, like they're falling so quickly, and the consumption is rising to meet that every single time. The consumption is outstripping it. But ultimately, maybe we will get more efficient models. Maybe we will have a greater baseline for decision making. And so one of the things I always ask teachers to consider if they are bringing AI in any way into their classroom, that they have to meet these 4 conditions. Is your classroom environment actually richer? Like genuinely, has it provided in a way that you could not do yourself? Has it provided an opportunity, an expectation, an experience for a student that was out of our reach before? Here's another one. Has it actually freed up time? We talk a lot about using it to remove the drudge work, to remove the things that make teaching or education slower, more boring, more frustrating. Could it be the unlock for teacher burnout? Could it be the unlock for teacher well-being that we've been asking for a long time? Potentially. But in one school that we visited, their most ardent AI cheerleader had given his voice to 11 labs so he could send podcasts to the kids. He'd automated all the feedback on his students' formative work. He had used AI to schedule and write parent updates. And he generated all of his lesson plans using AI. He had saved himself 12 to about 15% of his working week, and he was ecstatic. And he would tell everybody. And what did the school do? Gave him another class because he was available. So the natural reaction, the natural implication of this is that if we are going to free up time, we're going to have to be much more strategic in what we use that time for. Are we going to generate more work with that time? Are we going to chase productivity or efficiency? Are we going to balance? Are we going to return back to the things that we actually want that time for? Because there's never been an easier time in the history of humanity to work yourself to death. AI is a little bit like, I know I'm stretching my metaphors today from plastic to Ozempic. It helps students to stop caring about curiosity. It helps them to no longer crave challenge and interest. And for teachers, same thing. It can stop you from engaging with the things that made you a great teacher in the first place. Like lesson planning is boring, but it's really useful. Marking is quite frustrating, especially now that it's a lot of AI material, but you get to know your students well. Those are the parts that maybe we need to rethink in terms of what AI is actually going to be for in education. If it doesn't make your classroom environment richer, if it isn't genuinely freeing up time, is it serving students in a way that you couldn't before? Or has it reduced productive struggle in students? Not struggle, but productive struggle. That friction that we actually want in education. Because without friction, obviously there's no light, there's no heat, there's no true learning. And AI does sometimes circumvent that learning process for students, if they wanted to, and sometimes even when they don't want it to, because it's so appealing. So we work with schools to think about, okay, how can we make our assessments what's our personal philosophy to assessment? What's our personal philosophy to curriculum? Now, what's our school engagement with the sustainability goals? Because we still need to do something. We can't just say, oh, it's doom and gloom, or don't use it, it's terrible, or use it and forget about the impacts. We can't do that. So one of the tools that we do with students and with teachers, because we realized teachers need it very quickly after we did it for students, is a more deliberate moment. A moment of discernment where you think, like that moment when you have a plastic bottle and you decide whether you're going to recycle it or throw it away. We need a thought process that returns agency to kids in that moment. So here's the students one. Is the AI tool that I'm using, does it feed my learning goals? Now, that's not a question that students necessarily will engage with. But as we go through it, giving them an opportunity to think, do I already know this? Do I already have it somewhere? Am I just being lazy? Have I considered the environmental impact? Will I still be proud of my work? That's something we don't ask them anywhere near enough. In the international school system, we're seeing students using it a lot for achievement. They're not using it for engagement at all. They are getting the job done. They are cutting and pasting. Or, my favorite thing is they're listening to TikTok that tells them which are the best humanizing apps. When I ask them how do they avoid detection, they're a little bit reticent to tell me. When I ask them how their friends avoid detection, they'll tell me absolutely everything. They'll tell me the best websites, they'll tell me the order in which to put them in, and then they'll tell me which teachers can spot it and which can't. So it's really interesting how their AI sensitivity is shifting over time, and their knowledge of that is incredibly up to the moment. But their pride in that work, their sensitivity to a human reading it or not reading it, is still very palpable when it's missing. So we have to think about that energy paradox. For schools, it's quite clear, and I think for humanity and society, AI could genuinely solve our sustainability problems. It could, correctly used, correctly focused, and with enough energy, could figure out our energy problems. We're seeing small pockets of this already, slightly more efficient batteries, ideas for simulations and replications that might help us in our chase for infinite energy. But to get there, we're going to have to invest huge amounts of compute or processing or other words like that. We're going to have to invest huge amounts of energy. And the conversation has now become a much more naked one, where industry talks about where are we going to get the energy infrastructure to meet this demand. And that conversation is much more honest in the last 2 to 3 weeks, I think. I'm hearing a lot more coming through about that. So for schools, they can't control that. For education as a system, we have no control or agency in that conversation. That's an enterprise conversation. All we can do is protect our students' cognition, give them the tools to think about, did I want to use AI in that moment? So a moment of deliberation before, and tools to evaluate the use after. Because we can teach them about hallucinations, but they're already quite good at that. Fake news, everything's fake news. We need them to be more discerning. And the problem with AI is not always bias or hallucinations, it's the risk of mediocrity. It's the acceptance of a very probabilistic answer instead of looking for improbable connections. So those are the tools that we work with schools. And then when they need more practical, and then when they need a number slap in the face, whatever it might be that they metaphorically need with their students, it's useful to have a look at some CO2 calculators where you can ask them to put in as many prompts as they used for this assessment, as many images that they generated, and God forbid if they did a video, put it in there and they will see an equivalence. It will tell them in terms of energy consumption, in equivalences that they feel comfortable with, it will tell them how much they used. And some people are starting to do really good work in this area because we don't always need the best model. We don't need the optimum model. Many of these incredibly powerful small language models, SMALs, or LLMs that are slightly older are still incredibly powerful. We haven't really experienced the limits of those models. So there are people from Hugging Face, I don't know if you know Hugging Face or Salesforce, who are genuinely really trying to unearth some of the data here, because the data are hard to get. In terms of energy efficiency and in terms of model distribution and all of these things, you can actually find some statistics. You can get an energy report card on certain models. There's an energy leaderboard where people move up and down the leaderboard. So if I know I'm going to do something that doesn't require the absolute best, if I want to use my wine selecting strategy, which is where I'll go for not the cheapest, something 2 or 3 down from the bottom, that's a really good strategy to use with AI. Because unless you need the optimal answer, and there's a 60,000K difference between the highest model and the lowest, 60,000X difference between the highest and the lowest model, I don't need the absolute extreme. And the routers and the routers that you see in AI now are trying to address that. If it needs a reasoning, it will send you to a reasoning. If it doesn't need a reasoning, it will send you somewhere else. And that's all happening behind the screen. But if we can give that to students, if we can give that to schools, then they can start to understand that connection between energy, consumption, and their actions, so that we don't repeat the mistakes of plastic, so that we're not indiscriminately using something and then saying, oops, at the end. because that's what we're at risk of doing right now. Often, when I'm talking to schools, we'll talk about water. That's really important. Not so much here, obviously. It's not a big issue for us with our data centres, but access to clean water is already an issue in Tennessee, where there are massive data centres. It's a huge issue in New Orleans. They have strategically chosen states in America that have very large land masses and very poor local populations, because access to clean water is essential. There are other cooling ways, and cooling is improving in data centres. But for the moment, water is incredibly valuable. And all we can do then is all we've ever been able to do as individuals, which is make conscious, considered decisions around our own consumption. So one of the things that I do, I put myself on an energy diet regularly, and I try to, this is an insane strategy, I wouldn't recommend anybody does this, but I actually do track my AI consumption. I will check how many queries I'm doing. I will always look for a stock photo before I will generate an image. Only if the thing does not exist in the history of humanity will I then go and use it. And I can't make do with something else. Then I will do an AI image, often for illustrative purposes or for experimentation. But I do encourage with schools who are kind of adopting and experimenting with AI, that they take a moment and they do it much, much more deliberately. That they think about their energy consumption as part of a diet. What are they comfortable with consuming? And what is too much? Where's the limit in terms of where our cost-benefit analysis comes in? So we always suggest that you choose the most efficient model that you can find. And if you don't have that knowledge base to go on, that's okay. It's perfectly fine. Go with what you're using. Go with whatever's approved by the school. Go with whatever your organization has invested in. And try and encourage practices in the stakeholders, in the community, that would lower their carbon footprint. Potentially, there's no such thing as a green AI, but there are greener AIs, there are greener opportunities, and we have to ask ourselves then, which percentage of those opportunities could we actually scale back? So, in the interest of disclosure and transparency, so during this presentation, I did 13 Claude queries. I like Claude for writing. I think it's incredibly good for writing at the moment. It's not my daily driver, but it's definitely up there. Gemini, I did 3 Geminis. I'm really preferring Gemini at the moment in terms of the responsivity. And I did 2 ChatGPT queries to check the energy consumption. Because it's very interesting. They all give you very different references for power. They give you very different references for consumption. And I like to triangulate them. I haven't done any videos. I haven't done any images. I wouldn't tend to. And I don't use the slide generations because that's something that I'm already quite used to, so I don't, but lots and lots of teachers do. They love it for slide generation, Gamma, Notebook LM. These are very popular in international schools at the moment. And I did do 1 deep research query, which uses about 13 times more energy than a classic query. So those are my sins that I'll admit to now. And then as part of that Catholic guilt, I do like to try and offset if I can. When I've gotten to a certain point where I've used too much AI by my own feeling, I will try and offset with carbon. It's very hard to buy CO2 credits as an individual. You are having to buy into an industry plan, or you're having to buy unused credits of poorer nations, and it didn't quite feel right. So I've kind of got a little bit insane and started planting trees to offset the AI. It is bonkers. My back garden is looking ridiculous. My husband's had to go and get an allotment, mainly to get away from me and my trees, but it's truly a concern for me. And I think if we can't learn the lessons of social media and cognition, and if we can't learn the lessons of plastic and the environmental impact of things that we did not consider in time, then those are 2 great lessons to get it right this time. So that's our call to action for today. How am I doing for time? Are you okay? It's never happened before. This is great. As learning pioneers, this is what we need to do. We need to be more considerate with our use. For students, this looks like reminding them, you don't have to argue with it. When it hallucinates, just pull out. You're wasting time. It's going to agree with you eventually anyway. Stop correcting it. We saw this with Sam Altman when he told us to stop saying please and thank you, because they wanted to reduce their energy costs for that reason. But then we get silly sentences like, that's amazing, what a great idea, at the beginning of every single answer. So we have ways of being more efficient, of tuning and timing and turning the temperature on our responses. So we work with students to make sure they're doing that. We try to have minimal AI the Marie Kondo of AI, if you will. We try and have them be as efficient and as careful with their use as possible. So we, as curriculum and assessment designers, people who are teaching and learning, people who are thinking about assessment, people who are supporting teachers in training, this is a great conversation to have now. Because we never know what we don't know. We simply don't. And all of these numbers are a moving target. The next model that comes out will have significantly different parameters and different context windows and different energy needs. But the underlying message is still the same. Oh, no, don't see that. We need to think about what tools and mechanisms and suggestions that we can give teachers, students, leaders, and ourselves to make sure that our AI use is ethical, that it's sustainable, that it's minimizing disruption to their brain, to our hands, to our hearts, to our planets. So I'd like to say thank you so much for the time. I've put my LinkedIn profile there. If you'd like a copy of the slides, just let me know. And more importantly, if you could take away a slightly, not an anti-AI perspective, but a slightly more deliberate use of AI in any given moment, then my work here is done. So thank you so much for your time.